Good morning. We're gonna. Good morning, Ned. You're in charge. We're going to start a little bit early today. We got a great program, and then we want to make sure we got plenty of time for our speakers. Let me first wish everybody a happy Halloween and happy All Saints Day today, right, Mac? That's right. I hope everybody had a good evening and no tricks, just treats. All right, let's start with Craig Pendergrass bussing tables. Good to see Craig back after his bike incident.
Thank you all for your thoughts, prayers, and concerns.
Well, we're glad you're okay and that you're back with us. All right, let's start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we give thanks for this day that you've created. We give thanks for the opportunity to gather for food and fellowship and some fun. We ask that you watch over our nation as we approach our election next week. May all things work out well. We give thanks for our speakers today and their presentation. We also give thanks for this food, lovingly prepared for us. And we ask that you watch over our members who couldn't be with us today due to health reasons. Amen. All right. Welcome to the guys on Zoom. George Stickle, you can hear us? Just a thumbs up. All right. Did somebody give a thumbs up? All right. Okay. All right, good. All right, Scott, you want to tell us our speaker next week?
The speaker next week is Jack Calhoun, and I think he's going to talk about transitioning from the work world into retirement, but I'm not 100% sure. So come and hear Jack speak next week, no matter what he talks about.
There's a lot of talk about transitioning these days. All right, let me start off by asking, how many bike riders do we have in here? Wow. Wow, good crowd. Years ago, former bike riders, okay. I think that's 100%. Holy. Wow. All right, our speakers today are well known to us. We have Frank First, who's spoken to us. This is his 5th time or 6th time. He's spoken about riding across America, about photography, and that's it. And then Richard Griffiths spoke to us multiple times too, mainly on communication and journalism. But today they're going to talk about a venture they took this summer. So I'm going to turn it over to Richard and Frank.
Can everybody hear me? Yes, I think. Good. Well, it was quite the adventure. The plan was hatched before the pandemic. I was diagnosed with melanoma, and I was given 50-50 chance of making it 5 years. And the miracle of Emory's Cancer Treatment Center and the new drugs that came along, and the care team that included the team who worked with Jimmy Carter, pulled me out. And one of the things I resolved that I was going to do was do something I'd wanted to do for years, and that was ride my bike down the Rhine from the high Alps down to the sea, down to the North Sea. And, you know, it was all set to go, and we were scheduled to go in April of 2020. Didn't happen. So then I had a recurrence and came back out of it and really, really wanted to celebrate that and recruited some friends, one of whom was Frank. And we set out to make it happen.
And it so happened,
Here's the mic. So
it so happened that right when Richard asked me to join him, which I was immediately interested in, I had also just decided to retire. So I'd given my notice to my company. The end date was kind of open. Richard said, we're leaving on April 28th. There's no changing that. So I retired on April 26th. And 2 days later, we got on a flight to Amsterdam to start what was a wonderful adventure. This is the route. You can, oh, I need to.
I got it.
Okay, Richard's gonna animate that. This is the Rhine River. It starts in the high Alps, southeast of Zurich, heads to the east to Liechtenstein in Austria, turns back west across the Lake Constance on the border with Germany, then heads north along the French-German border and on into the Netherlands, to Rotterdam, and ultimately to the North Sea at the Hook of Holland. And our route was pretty much the Rhine River itself. There were many crossings, many switchbacks, different kinds of trails, dirt, gravel, pavement, cobblestone, car streets. But in the end, we pretty much followed the river itself.
So the team was me, Frank, and a buddy of mine that I met in Warsaw. He was the executive in charge of Scripps International, which was based in Warsaw, which oversaw TVN, which is the largest independent television network in Poland. It has over-the-air broadcast network, 2 news cable channels. And I was consulting with him and advising him in their fuss with the government. And we became very close friends. When Discovery bought Scripps International, he retired and moved back to Knoxville. And we had done some other trips around Europe. He did one that started in Portugal and ended in Warsaw. And I joined him for a big chunk of that through Germany. And then my former exchange student from 40 years ago, just about to retire from his pharmaceutical company, and Krzysztof Lebrant, who is a Polish plastics engineer who was a friend of Jim that I got to know on one of our previous trips. He joined us. The logistics were that we literally disassembled the bikes here, put them in bike boxes, ship them on Delta Airlines. Delta does not charge for carrying your bikes. They're like golf clubs. And it just counts as one of your bags, which is an awesome thing. We shipped them to Amsterdam and reassembled them on the street outside a bike shop, and then stashed the bike boxes in the bike shop, and then began our journey out.
So as I said, Richard and I flew from Amsterdam Sunday night to Monday morning. Monday night, we got on an overnight train from Amsterdam to Zurich, and that was our cabin on the train. The next day, we took, was it 2 or 3 more trains?
3
segments from Zurich up to the Alps. And our original plan was to start in a pass where literally the Rhine began as a spring burbling out of the ground. The pass was closed because of 10 feet of snow. So we had to start a little bit shorter there in a town called Shamot. And you can see in this lower left train, you can even see the little cog in between the rails that it took to get up the steep passage into the mountains.
So this was our start. It was cold. It was slightly above freezing, a few degrees. A lot of loose snow visible around us, but nothing on the roads, which was absolutely terrific. We started at 4,760 feet, which is about 2,000 feet short of the summit of the pass, where the 10 feet of snow was. We that day climbed 846 feet on our way down and dropped 3,727 feet. So even though we went up a little bit, we had a big, fast descent. There's the barrier. That's the barrier where the road was blocked because of danger of avalanches. That's why we had to start at that point.
So we began the descent, pretty steep. These are the bikes. When we're finished, you can come up and try to lift one of them. We carried everything that we needed for the trip in those panniers that hang off the back. No camping gear because we were staying at hotels every night, but all of our food, equipment, spare clothes, and even some spare parts. The panniers weighed about 25 pounds for most of us. It was very noticeable going uphill.
They were a little back heavy. So coming to a stop, there was a tendency for the bike to twist backwards underneath your legs. You had to be aware of that. Handling on the road was fine.
25 pounds each?
Yes.
25 pounds total for the two. Yeah.
For the two bags.
Yeah. So these are gravel bikes. They are designed to be able to go off-road, but they're not mountain bikes. We adapted them to be touring bikes and put these racks on the back. Very solid, very sturdy. So they were good for this purpose. Tuned the bikes up, did everything to clean them, put them back together immaculately. Very first day, within about 20 miles from the summit, I had a mechanical problem. So here we are on the side of the mountain. The headset started to get loose. We caught it before it was dangerous. It could have become dangerous if we kept it going. Miraculously, within 5 miles of noticing that, we came across a bike shop. Brand new, had only been open a month. Huge place, nobody in there. Mechanics just waiting to service people. So we walked in, they took the bike apart, fixed it, and we were on our way within an hour. This is that little train that we took up to the mountain as we're descending. We were crisscrossing the Rhine many times as we would the entire trip.
This is our first crossing of the Rhine here. And as you can see, we've dropped down quite a bit, and the snow line is well above us there. Young calves, and of course the required
Bernese mountain dog.
Yeah, exactly. This was lots of little agriculture along the way. First covered bridge at Elance. At this point, the Rhine is about the size of Peachtree Creek. You know, it's little cleaner, but yes, we were staying in what I would call cheap and cheerful hotels. We really did. We had one maybe that was I wouldn't go back to, but most of them were really good and relatively inexpensive. As you can see, this is not particularly luxurious. No sweeping marble lobby. But there was a place to secure the bikes. And there you can see Frank drying his bike shorts from the previous day with the hand dryer in the hotel. That was the routine. You've only got 3 sets of clothing. You have to make sure every night everything gets washed and hung up to dry.
Many beautiful churches in the Swiss countryside. They all had these tall, steep spires. This was one of my favorites. This was as we were entering the Swiss Grand Canyon. It was the most beautiful part of the ride. The Rhine Gorge, as it's called in Switzerland. These beautiful little villages that we rode through as we were beginning the descent into the valley. As we got deeper into the gorge, there was a lot of engineering on the road to cut through the mountain passes, long switchbacks, as you can see, that we came down as we came down to the bottom of the gorge, and then back up again. And here we are looking down. There's actually a railroad track running along the bottom of the river, or next to the river in the bottom of the gorge there. More of those views. This, you can see how narrow the passageway was for the road off to the right there. And that's that little train that runs up the gorge.
That's the famed Bernina Mountain Express that you can spend a lot of money to ride, and express in quotation marks because its average speed is about 35 miles an hour through the Alps. As you can see, the drama, the size of these mountains is enormous. If you look here, that is Frank and Jim, just as the road turns around. One of the things that we saw several times on the journey were these secured caves, which we were told are Swiss military installations up in the mountains. I guess stashes of equipment or supplies or operational bases.
Yeah, we'll get to some of the World War II stuff because we saw a lot of that, as you can imagine, along the Rhine. Here are some more of those little churches. Some of them were so teeny. There was not much more than an altar and a few chairs inside. And some of them were quite beautiful, almost cathedral-like, as you can see in the middle there.
We mentioned that Bernina Mountain Express. At one point, as we're coming down the valley, you're crisscrossing the railway line because the railway line is relatively level, and that's where the bike path runs. And as you see, it's got Japanese kanji on the side. Well, that was a celebration of the 1979 creation and opening of the Hakone Railway in Japan through the mountains, which the Swiss Reinen Railway Company had advised on and become an investor in. And back in early 81, 82, when I was with CBS News, I actually got to ride that railway. So it was sort of bizarre seeing. This is the Hotel Three Kings. And as you can see, we've got the laundry hanging in the window to get everything done before dinner.
A lot of
dropping into the floodplain here of the Rhine. As you get further down towards the Bodensee or Lake Constance, you get these large flat areas where you see a lot of grapes.
And you can see the river getting wider as we go down.
And faster. What river is that? That's the Rhine. Continuing down the Rhine. Do they fish the river? Yeah, you see some people fishing. Yeah. We were using Garmin. We had using Strava heat maps. A heat map is where have people gone before? So Strava keeps where the popular routes are, and where popular routes are suggest safer routes. So a lot of what we chose followed heat maps of previous riders or local riders who were doing their routes, and then applied that, created those routes, and then downloaded them to the little Garmin here on the bike.
Richard's making that sound easier than it really was. So 18 days of riding, 850 miles. There were hundreds of turns on the route. And Richard, through the process that he talked about, mapped out every single turn for every day and created 45, I believe, distinct individual maps that would cover a half or a third of the day. We'd load those into our computers and it literally told us every turn along the way. And even still, there were unexpected things we found where a road was out or a bridge was out and we had to do some compensation and mapping as we went on our own. But he did a superb job and it was really impressive.
So as you can see, Heidi Way, who remembers the movie Heidi? This is all where this was filmed, up in the Ohm as we began our descent. Lots of vineyards here, Chasselas grapes, Petit Arvin, the whites, Cornelin and Cabernet Franc scoring along the way, a lot of tending of those vineyards. They were just opening out. Here you can see some, the flowers have already, and they're actually beginning to grow the grapes.
Did you have telecommunications that feed the bikes?
We had visual communication. Yeah, we tried to stay within visual range of everybody. Everybody had a cell phone, but.
It is a great question. Sometimes we did get separated and we found that the best tool was the WhatsApp app. You could usually use your phone, but WhatsApp seemed to work in places where we didn't have good cell coverage.
This was May. We started the first in the top of the mountain and ended on the 18th.
And as I mentioned, so we headed east out of Switzerland to the Austrian border. Along the border is a little country called Liechtenstein. And the border between Switzerland and Liechtenstein is right down the middle of the river. So we crossed this covered bridge and
that's Liechtenstein.
Off to the right. And
the metropolis of Vaduz.
This was the border crossing. Got our passport stamped and crossed back over and continued the ride.
Continuing down here, this is right on the Austrian-Swiss border. As you can see, that's one of the World War II Swiss defensive bunkers left over. I love the way the concrete is leached, the white that matches the mountains in the background. And there's the Austrian border. This is an stunningly amazing engineering marvel. It's a brand new bridge over the bottom of the Rhine. What had been happening with climate change, the old bridges that were running along there started with big storms or big fast snowmelts backing up the river. And you get all this debris washing down, and they were worried the bridges were going to wash away, but more importantly, that it was going to flood back as far as Liechtenstein and the towns in Austria in the lower area. So this is a bridge that is almost a mile long and raised way up. And the way they did the engineering to pull this together is remarkable. There are all kinds of videos online if you're interested in looking at that. It is the bridge Hard Fussach, Fussach. But you can waste at least an hour watching the engineering videos of how they put it together. They're all in English as well. It's pretty amazing.
So then now we start to head back west to the Bodensee or Lake Constance. This is a big lake. Actually, there's 3 of them between the Swiss and German border. Here are
France. Oh no, you're right. You're right.
Richard and I on the shore. Jim had enough for a little while, so he took a 2-day rest and took a boat ride over the lake while Richard and I pedaled around the shore.
We met and rendezvoused in a place called Friedrichshafen, and that's where the Zeppelins were built. And there's a Zeppelin museum with large chunks of the surviving model that was the Hindenburg. And so you can see this enormous structure you can walk up into. They did a big cross section, the engine compartment that's looking up into from the lobby and that is the inside of the passenger area, the gondola, which hangs inside the frame of the airship. I was amused the other day because one of the movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the latest one, has a whole section which they shot in the museum, but as if it was the actual Hindenburg or the surviving, and the lead characters make their escape from the Germans as the airship lifts off. They're still making Zeppelins in Friedrichshafen. And who are the customers? Goodyear Tire and Rubber. I had not realized that that Zeppelin makes those for them.
Richard, what's the bottom middle picture?
Bottom middle picture, let's see. That's the stairway to the command. That's inside the Zeppelin itself. You're going up to the cockpit and the control center. And more passenger cabins up there.
Are they use helium now?
Yes, they use helium now. Yeah.
Hydrogen in those days.
Yeah, it was interesting. The reason that they were using hydrogen is that the US would not sell the Germans any helium. Helium was in such short supply. The war boards and the US government blocked export of helium. It was it's like the vital things today that we want to stockpile to protect our national security.
So here you can see, as I mentioned, a lot of different types of paths and trails. This is one where there's a dedicated bike lane, but next to the highway. And occasionally we had to get off our bikes altogether and climb stairs or scramble through some vegetation.
But again, look how clear the river is there. I mean, just beautiful, clear water.
Are those man-made lakes?
No, they are glacial lakes, and they're filling with all the runoff from the Alps. But they were deeply scoured. They remain still very deep, but they're essentially a filter because all of the runoff, the sand, the silt that runs down from the Alps drops out in Lake Constance. And so what comes out the other side is crystal, crystal clear. Those are orchards down there in the center. This is Rheinfell, an absolutely beautiful Swiss city. It goes back to the 12th century. That is a monastery there in Rheinfeld, which is now a museum. It is perfectly preserved, as if people left just last week. Remarkable paintings and beautiful, beautiful decoration. This is the old banquet room or refectory it was ultimately painted and decorated in 1516 with the histories of ancient Rome. This is a little detail of that, where they were, pointing out the interminable wars between the Holy Roman Empire and the Greeks and the folks at Carthage. And this is depicting the fall of Carthage in 146 BCE, but they're all wearing modern 1500s dress, and the fleeing Carthaginians are all wearing German uniforms. No subtlety there.
Richard, we might need to speed up a little bit.
Okay.
So this is the hotel. As Richard said, Rheinfels is a very old town. The hotel we were staying in was from the 14th century. This is me walking down the hallway to our room, and I couldn't even fit under the beams. But it was like staying in a castle. This was one of our rooms. One of the other hazards of the trip was that we did share rooms. We learned each other's snoring patterns. I gave as good as I got, but some nights I did not get much sleep.
This is the phenomenal Rheinfall. This marks the point where the Rhine becomes navigable for shipping. But this is a 75-foot drop with 21,000 cubic feet per second going over. So a monster drop.
Bill Shatanis gave us a talk about his trip to Rheinfels.
Okay.
It's spectacular. This is the Rhine again. Again, you can see how clear the water is. We were picking, this is where Jorg joined us, the Richard's old exchange student. He joined us from Germany. And this is the longest covered bridge in Europe. Forget how long it is, but here's a picture of Richard looking down, still open, not for car traffic, but for bikes and pedestrians.
So one of our stops, it's now pouring with rain on our journey. Not quite so much fun, but I wanted to see Augst, or Kaiser Augst, which is the Roman settlement in Switzerland. And as you can see, this open area you can ride your bike into, but this was the old Colosseum. And that entrance, that little door there, was where the gladiators came out. And this is the partially restored auditorium on the outside, which is still in use for plays today. But it was rainy and cold and miserable, and we did not want to hang around in that. And finally, we found a hot chocolate at a ladle. It was the best hot chocolate I've ever had out of a machine. It was the perfect moment. So cathedrals. First, we hit a lot of these. They were beautiful. They were beautiful and easy to ride the bike up to, park the bikes outside while we took turns going in. This is Basel, and it's pretty cool to return there. This place goes back to 1500. This current structure, 1500. The first bishop was from 453, and he had been at Augst, the Roman settlement. And when that Roman settlement was abandoned, he moved to Basel. It's now a Reformed Protestant church. And this marked my second visit there. The first visit, you remember Shirley Guthrie? I was on a theological visit with Shirley Guthrie, and Debbie and I sat up there and listened to Brahms, or German Requiem, being played in that. It was magical, and it was still magical to visit. So on from Basel, there's Colmar, more of a medieval church with the flying buttresses, a little less elegantly constructed. And then Strasbourg with its stunning astrological clock, which, as you probably, if you've ever been in Europe, church bells every hour on the hour, and certainly in the German-speaking countries, a big peal of bells at 6 a.m. Get up, let's get going. and then come make sure you're at mass in the evening, and another big peal of bells. If you control time, you control the way of life in the community, and the church is set out to control time, so invested vast amounts of money in these clocks. This is Worms. It's now St. Peter's Church. It remains a Catholic church. This is where Martin Luther was summoned to defend his theses. You remember the things he nailed to the church door. And he defended them to a committee in the building next to the church. Well, after all of that happened, the church sold off that building, demolished it and sold off the land. It's now a yoga studio. That's exactly right. And then, of course, Köln, the Cathedral of St. Peter, which it remains the tallest twin-spire church in the world. And during World War II, it was the marker for the German bombers coming down into the Rhine Valley to target the factories and target the areas around Cologne. It was finally restored in the 1950s after the German, American, British assaults on the building. It gets 6 million visitors a year, absolutely overwhelming.
So as Richard said, we ran into a little rain, and we were really lucky for the overall trip, but for about 3 days, it rained constantly. And we had contingency plans. We always had to get to the hotel where we had a reservation, so we couldn't miss that. But if we really wanted to, we could hop on a train, get close to where we needed to go. But we used that only a couple of times, I'm proud to say. This was one of those days. And it's hard to see, but here we're on a kind of a muddy sand track, and the mud
towpath
was kicking up onto the bikes and actually all the way up the backside of our gear. And I mean, I was head to toe rain gear all the way up over my helmet, and I was still soaked underneath. So when we checked in that night, we found this garden hose, and we were able to wash everything down, including ourselves. It turned out when we finished, though, we learned this was not even the place we were staying. So we had to get back on our bikes and find the real B&B that we were looking for.
Probably 4 to 6.
Yeah. We were doing a lot of sightseeing and stopping. So it could have been faster if you did it straight through, but that wasn't really the purpose.
Again, this is the ease of use of the trains in Europe. All of the trains had compartments for bicycles where you can hang them inside, which is pretty cool. On the major express trains, you've got to get a reservation in advance, but on the locals, you know, the worst that happens if you can't get a slot is wait an hour. We never had to do that.
This is where you're supposed to put your bike. As you can see from this sign, there's supposed to be no bikes there, but sometimes that's where we had to put our bikes.
Yeah, we didn't even lock them. We hung them and sat nearby. They're literally just hanging.
So a few points along the trip, we actually left the banks of the Rhine and we rode along these beautiful canals. Most of these pictures are from the Rhine-Rhone Canal. So it was a waterway built for barge traffic that could leave the Rhine, go to the Rhone, and then go south to the Mediterranean. This is one of the more beautiful spots. That's Richard along the path there. Just wonderful riding here, and completely flat, of course.
And paved.
And paved, yeah.
Yes.
We've got a couple of pictures.
You just kind of zip around them. I love this. This is one of the amazing pictures Frank captured along the journey. Even a junkyard can be beautiful.
Citroën
vans and trucks.
A lot of we still haven't got to the industrial part of the Rhine. It's mostly agriculture, but we were impressed with how high tech the farming was. Lots of dairy, strawberries, rhubarb, but these, you can see these plowed, tilled fields all done with GPS tracking to get them perfectly aligned and then planted the same way.
And another important piece of agriculture, of course, is winemaking. And this is in Alsace. This was a Grand Cru winery that we arranged a visit to, where they produced beautiful Rieslings, Pinot Gris, and Chasselas wines. Their big stars are high-end white wines, just gorgeous wines. Continuing to follow the canal, that's actually the beginning of a lock. You can sort of see that there. And then all along that canal is the Maginot Line, where there are bunkers which you can just walk into. But you can see on this turret where it had been hit with a bunch of rounds. There, beside this memorial to the Maginot Line, is a massive crater left by a Stuka dive bomber. The crater is probably pushing the size of this room. And they have some antique American equipment on display there.
So one of the other things Richard did for us was find a few fine dining occasions for us. And this was in Alsace, which is a wonderful place for food people and wine people. And these people really took care of us tonight. It was a unique experience, way beyond what I am used to, normal dining. But it was also very reasonably priced. If you were to compare this to what a Michelin restaurant here in Atlanta now costs, this was probably half that for, I don't know, 15 courses, including 3 desserts.
It was pretty amazing. One of the things we had to do was keep one set of really nice clothes rolled up carefully in the bag, put in plastic, protected inside, so we could dress up for those occasions when we were going out somewhere. Back on the canal, this was about the point where Jörg's e-bike started blowing spokes on his rear wheel. And the first one, oh, no worries, it's just one spoke. And then the second spoke went. And then the third spoke went. And I think he lost 4 by the time we found a bike shop. It was a national holiday in France. And to our amazement, you know how sometimes on the 4th of July, you hear Mexican construction workers still doing work on the house down the street? Well, these were Serbs keeping their bike shop open on the French equivalent of July 4th. And we were able to get everything fixed up. Lots of very friendly bike services along the way, and service stations along the bike paths where you can recharge your e-bike if you lost energy, pump up your tires, but also hand tools for doing maintenance. One of the things, I was able to find a plastic mud flap that fit my bike, but the bike shop only had one. So Frank, ever the engineer, went out and bought some table mats, plastic table mats, cut them up and created them in such a way as to keep him from getting that debris down the back of his neck.
Most of it's done in English. Or was there ever a language barrier?
My German is not great, but serviceable for, can I get a room? Can we, I have a reservation. We have a problem, the basics. I could not do a television interview in German, but I can get through the basics. And then by this point, we also had Jörg with us, who was fluent, obviously. And Krzysztof from Poland, he works in Hamburg, so his German is fluent. So we didn't really have many difficulties. Here's another example of the bike friendliness. So in many towns, they just mark the streets. This is a bicycle priority street, Fahrradstraße. And then crossing the big bridges, there's a bike lane marked in red. You're not allowed, if you're a pedestrian, to walk in that bike lane. Even the trash cans in Holland are set up such as you're riding your bike, you can toss the garbage in as you're riding by. And one of the museums we went to, a bike storage outside where you can actually lock the whole bike in a closed container so people can't mess with it.
As you've seen, we were crisscrossing the Rhine a lot over bridges, and a lot of times we were on ferries, and that was always fun. Here we are boarded on one. One interesting thing we noted: these ferries are marked with their how much tonnage they can carry, 4 trucks or 3 tanks. So this is all NATO territory, and those ferries are prepared to take a tank across if they need to.
It was political season while we were there. It was the run-up to the European Parliament elections, of course, hotly contested. The alternative, we were going through large portions of Bavaria where the Alternative for Deutschland, the far right party, had been making a large push. The SPD and CDU were the parties that are in power, and Free Democratic Party. But you see some of the others here. If I can be a little crude, these are the AFD, Our Land First, Limit EU Power. But the Volt Party, they formed in opposition to AFD and pushing back against AFD. And AFD was, they were smart. They would use ladders to get their signs very high on the lampposts where people couldn't tear them down. But Volt would come and put another banner underneath which says, "Sie kein Arschloch," which means don't be an asshole. Literally there. And of course, AFD swept the old East Germany. Almost all the seats, except in Berlin and Potsdam, went to the AFD. Most of the rest went to the CDU candidates.
What about Bavaria? Did you say Bavaria was there?
They polled very well, but they didn't win. When I say they polled, that means that they got a high percentage, but not enough to take it.
So now we're getting in the lower part of the Rhine, lots of industry. Jorg worked in a pharmaceutical plant, so he gave us a little weekend tour off hours, which was a lot of fun. We had to get dressed head to toe in this hazmat gear, including the little booties.
Lots of interesting stuff there.
And this is where the barge traffic picks up. This is one carrying containers. That's a cruise ship. I bet somebody in here has been on one of the Viking river cruises. Anybody? No, they were up and down the river constantly, often getting off at docks as we went along. There's one of the paths.
We're starting to hit heavy industry, and a lot of it. This is rolled sheet steel for car manufacturing. Oh, we seem to have it frozen. Let me see if I can back that up. There we go.
What's the river looking like now?
A little murky. It's definitely much more turbid.
That's right. Most of your photos depict a flat course. Were there days that you faced an uphill grind most of the day?
Well, if you look at our starting elevation and our ending elevation, it was all downhill. but there were lots of ups and downs, but those were mostly in the Swiss, Austrian, and southern Germany areas. Once we got past the Rhinefell, the waterfall, it was really flat, very, very slightly downhill flat.
You just saw one mothballed plant. Here's another mothballed nuclear plant. They're investing everywhere in Germany and Switzerland with wind power, solar power, heavy investment. And they're all running flat out. I love this image that Frank captured here of the Swan and the industrial chemical plant in the background. That was one of BASF's container yards that we were riding our bikes through. Another that one is a functioning nuclear plant.
I had a lot of debates with the German guys about the nuclear plants. You know, Europe, of course, is probably ahead of us in reducing carbon emission, but at the same time, they're shutting all their nuclear plants down, which to me doesn't make sense. But he defended that position very vigorously. The Germans are very anti-nuclear. Here's you can see now the barges are getting bigger. This is really 2 barges stacked end to end. Kind of, you'll see that on the Mississippi too. The river's not
iron.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Huge piles of ferrous iron in there.
And here's one of the big Rhine river locks with this is a gas barge coming through. This looks like
that's gasoline.
Yeah.
And of course, those ubiquitous Viking cruise ships that were everywhere up and down the river, they're all identical.
A couple comments about the navigation. As we descended down the river, we'd see these mile markers, they're really kilometer markers, and they measure the distance from the city of Constance. So from Constance to the Hook of Holland, where it empties into the North Sea, is a little over 1,000 kilometers. So as we cruised along during the day, we could see ourselves ticking off the kilometers. This is one of those detours we had to make. If you look closely, you can see the vertical bars, or it's probably some sort of cabling, are bent on this bridge. Some sort of container ship had actually bumped into the bridge and crunched it. So that was closed, and we had to take a big detour around to find our way back over to this side.
Here are the markers on the side where ships were allowed to turn around and where it was legal to water ski on the river.
We did not see a single water skier.
No, we did not. This is the next big Roman city and absolutely spectacular. And if you're going to northern Germany, put this on your list. Xanten is a stunning Roman colonia Olpia. It was founded by Emperor Trojan in 13 BC. And the artifacts that they've recovered and there are remarkable. This one is a silver face mask and helmet with woven bronze, just stunningly beautiful, and these beautiful monuments. And this is the heating floor of the home, what's remains of the temple, and another, this is not a gladiator, a centurion's helmet. And here Shistov models, the museum actually had reproductions of some of the helmets that people could put on, and they're very heavy. And of course, here's gladiator Francus Fursticus heading into the Colosseum, which is beautifully maintained there.
Our last country, we're heading into Holland now, the Netherlands. And of course, we've actually seen these storks the entire trip, but you get some really good views of their nests on top of trees or chimneys often, and houses.
Who remembers the movie The Bridge Too Far and the Battle of Arnhem? So this is the bridge. And they have a large museum dedicated to the Poles and the English troops who were largely either wiped out or captured in that attempt to leapfrog the German defenses from behind. And ironically, it was the German defenders in that area were security guards from military bases that had been evacuated. They were sort of bringing up the rear, and they found themselves surrounding the drop zone, but they had no food and basically no ammunition. And one of the things that they figured out from what was in the pocket, what they call the pocket litter of the captured British soldiers, they figured out the codes for calling in supplies. And so the Germans stopped shooting down the RAF supply planes and instead used the special codes that they got to call in food and ammunition and weapons to the German positions, which is how the Germans were able to capture the British and the Poles there. There is this Shustov saw this, somebody with my name who had been awarded a number of medals of valor. I've since tried to look back in my family tree to find R.A. Griffiths, but I've not found him or matched him up. But these are, this is Dutch war graves, again, in that same area. And that on the right is a monument to the British RAF constructed by the Dutch for their liberation of Holland. And of course, poppies in full bloom.
This was a day where we were actually saying goodbye to Christoph. So it was back down to three of us, a little B&B out in the country in the Netherlands that we stayed at before we split up.
There's another fabulous Frank photo. This is Kinderjik. It's a National World Heritage Site. It's sort of one of those typical spots that all the cruise ships go to. We got there early in the day on the bikes with the mist on the water and beautiful reflection, spectacular. Well, we were able to clamber all over the inside and see the wooden gearings of these old windmills.
And now here we reach Rotterdam, the last major city before we go out to the Hook of Holland. And there's a quiz here. So we just had crossed over this bridge. It is named after perhaps the Netherlands' most famous Renaissance scholar, friend of Thomas More, Martin Luther, acquaintance of John Calvin, yet he remained a Catholic priest his entire life. Anybody know who it is? Who said that? Say it. Erasmus, yes.
Exactly.
This is the Erasmus Bridge.
This is now heading out the Rhine Canal from Rotterdam out to the Hook of Holland bikes. And that's basically the flood barrier that crosses the Rhine. It swings out if there's a super high tide. In 1953, massive floods swamped not only the Netherlands, but also the southeastern part of England, including near the town where I grew up, because those flood waters, those tides washed in 30 feet above the normal tide level. And now there's a flood barrier on the Thames that comes up from the bottom of the river. And here they have an arm with a barrier that drops out that crosses the river, so the flood tide can't come upstream.
So for this thing to work, the barrier has to get out of the bottom of the river.
Yes, it does. Yeah. But even if some leaked through, it still blocks the bulk of it.
So Rotterdam is the busiest port in Europe, and this canal between the Hook of Holland and the North Sea to Rotterdam is just full of commercial shipping. The ocean ships come through the canal, reach Rotterdam, and then the cargo is dispersed to barges and trains. That previous shot is actually of a North Sea ferry. It's humongous, but it's moving cars all around the North Sea.
The Stena Line runs from Harwich in the UK to Rotterdam, one of the busiest car ferries, and it's still much faster than the Channel Tunnel, loading your car onto a train and traveling through. This is a very poignant memorial monument. It's to the Jewish children who were the last evacuated out of Rotterdam at the end of the war. Many of them were evacuated on private British boats that raced over to get them as the Germans closed in. But they left their families and parents behind. And there we are. That's the end of the breakwater and the end of the journey. We had made it 845 miles. Looking back down the breakwater was an amazing sight. If you look on the left, on the seaside, seagulls all the way along. And on the Rhine side, swans on the brackish water. So that's our group making it to the end. These are the glamour pictures. Barely broke a sweat. And then back to Amsterdam by train and retrieving our bike boxes on the Sunday morning from the bike shop. It was supposed to open at 10 and we showed up at noon and there was no owner. I had, as a television producer, you always cover the contingencies. I got the bike shop owner's cell phone number, called him up. He was high as a kite. And he showed up at the bike shop, putting the marijuana cigarette on a little planter outside the door and then fumbling with the lock. And we'll get the bike boxes, no problem. And then back to Atlanta, where Pat Decker and Craig Keyworth, those of you who know Pat Decker from the church here, she's a member of Team Hack and Wheeze, and they met us at the airport. So there we go.
We're coming up to our hard stop, but we got a couple of questions. I think we got time.
Yeah, and we'll hang around for a minute if you've got specifics.
Were you ever worried about your bikes being either stolen or picked apart or whatever during the trip?
We were very careful to watch out for our bikes. You can see on mine, there's a big bike lock. We ran that heavy cable through all the bikes. We took all the Garmins and the lights in, obviously, to recharge anyway. One of the things we were repeatedly told was, you don't have to worry about theft. It's not an e-bike. Right now, apparently, the hot theft item are e-bikes, because while these bikes, by the way, I don't know whether you noticed, but all three of our bikes were Linsky's made in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it was Frank who first got me interested in Linsky's. And then I got Jim interested in Linsky's, and then I bought another one, and then Frank bought another one for this trip. They're titanium, which makes them very comfortable to ride. But in answer to your question, we weren't riding e-bikes, so we felt a little better about that. It's less of a target.
What do your bikes weigh?
Mine weighs 17.5 pounds. Excuse me, no, that's my road bike. 21 pounds with all the discs, and then add the 25-pound panniers and cargo on them, and then water bottles.
I pack lighter than Richard. I was a few pounds less than that.
but I had the cable.
Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been very interesting.
Perfect.
On your bridge too far,
Yeah.
the Dutch general subsequently became a preacher and married me and my wife.